Racist police officer insults black woman, unaware she's an undercover IA agent. Jackson Heights Police Department had long taken great satisfaction in being a symbol of justice, although under its sleek external foundation fractures were beginning to show. Emily Davis, a calm and assured black woman driving a sleek luxury automobile across busy city streets, what she did not expect was to become the focus of Officer Ryan Myers, a white cop known for using his power without mercy. But Myers was unaware that Emily's routine stop would permanently alter his life because wasn't just ordinary citizen, she worked as an undercover spy for internal affairs. How would this meeting go if Ryan's well-rooted prejudices cause him to fall from grace? Before we start, we know by the comments from where you're seeing, and make sure to subscribe for more twists, officer stories. Ryan Mears was gliding around Jackson Heights streets, a community that seldom offered him much problems. It was in the middle of his shift, and he was feeling as he typically did when he donned the uniform untouchable. His patrol car's sign of power gave him a sense of superiority that had grown natural over the years. Ryan delighted in the authority his badge gave, his eyes to scan the streets for anything or anyone, not for crime. It turned down a peaceful lane lined with didn't quite fit the picture he had in mind of how things ought to be. Costly of homes, something drew his eye, a sleek black luxury car. Driven behind the wheel just a little too quickly for Ryan's taste was a black woman dressed tastefully, radiating a subdued confidence. Ryan's eyes stayed on her for a moment more than required. His mind ran with presumptions about what she was doing. In this area of town, he believed the seed of suspicion sown by his own prejudices to be naturally turned onto him. On his lights, he waved for her to stop. Emily Davis, the woman in the luxury car, gently stopped to the side of the road. Her motions were methodical. She has been in circumstances similar to this previously, but today she slid down the window and could see Ryan approaching, his stance rigid and more than ready. Emily stayed calm while his hand rested needlessly on his belt, eyes observing Ryan knock on her window with just too much force. License and registration requested. His speech exuded superiority. No professionalism or courtesy were there. Courtesy. Emily stayed calm, her face showing no feeling as she reached. Ryan's gaze tracked her attentively as she reached into her handbag to grab the paperwork his mind had leaped to. Emily turned over her records silently, knowing exactly how this meeting would turn out. She had been taught to remain cool in such circumstances and gather every detail. Ryan checked the papers, a crooked smile slinking across his lips as if he were. His frustration simmered just beneath the surface, waiting for something to be out of place. Very excellent car, he murmured, glancing up at her with a patronizing sneer. You definitely, certainly. It's yours. The implication was obvious, but Emily didn't grab the bait. She kept her eyes fixed on him, firm and unflinching. Yes, she answered simply. Mine. Ryan's smile wavered somewhat. Most people would not be used to this, most of all. By now, women would have showed some signs of anxiety and would have stammered over their proposed words, try to defend herself or offer apologies. But Emily was different. Her composure upset him. He resolved to strive harder since he needed the money for something like this. He queried, his tone tinged with scorn. Not seems like you belong in. If you asked Emily, she wouldn't flinch. She had seen his type before this portion of town, and she knew exactly what he was aiming for. I wasn't aware I required your permission to pass by here, she answered, her voice level inside. She was already noting every word, every action. Ryan made this as part of her employment. His growing annoyance led him to showed. He leaned toward the window, his voice not in control of the circumstances the way he wanted to be. Usually, individuals like you do not drive cars like this. Descending lower, more scary people like you. He said, his eyes narrowed. You got something you wanted to tell me? Emily didn't reply right away. She knew that whatever she said would just make him more angry. She stayed quiet, her eyes. Ryan was beginning to feel the burden he was under, never leaving his house. Couldn't understand why this woman wasn't responding the way she was meant to. He was used to comply to terror, but she stayed calm instead, as if she knew something. She offered him none of that. Something. He stayed out of the car, Ryan directed, stepping back. Emily paused momentarily, but not out of anxiety. She was figuring her next action. Though she knew this was the time she had been waiting for, she had no intention of aggravating the matter. She opened the door gently, got out of the car standing tall, and fixed Ryan Ryan's sight. Felt a flash of irritation. He expected her to be scared, but she wasn't. He felt the balance of power slipping and became enraged. He strolled around her automobile, looking as though he might uncover something that would allow him to use his power. Her paperwork were in order, but her car was in great condition. She was not allowing him any margin. "You reside here," Ryan said with a harsh tone. Emily answered coolly. Ryan tightened his jaw, while gestured along the street couple blocks away. Didn't believe her, but everything he could do about her shouted confidence, and it shook him. She was not nervous. Worst of all, she was not giving him any. "Maybe I should contact," Ryan murmured, snatching his radio. He wasn't really here for the stop. Just wanted to test if he could shake her. Emily crossed, so prepare to call it in. Her arms fixed on him, her patience thin, known to be this was. She said the time Ryan would either push ahead or back down. Her voice steady. "Call it in." Ryan frozen for a second, startled, off target. His ego would not let him stop, even if something in the back of his mind informed him he was making a mistake. Couldn't let her triumph. Without another word, Ryan pulled his hand from the radio and turned back towards his patrol. As he realized this encounter was spiraling out of his grasp, and there was nothing more he could do, Emily observed him. Expression incomprehensible, yet within she knew she had everything she required. As Ryan left, not sure why he felt anything was odd, he had no concept that the woman he was trying to scare was an undercover internal affairs agent, and that his every word. Emily returned into her car, her every movement meticulously noted. Her look was serene, but within she knew this was only the start. Ryan Mears. Ryan stood by his patrol. He was about to pay for his deeds, and there was no way out. Automobiles staring over Emily's paperwork as though searching for something erroneous, something that would explain his treatment of her. Everything was in natural order, naturally based on her license registration, and though all of the proof of insurance was absolutely current, Ryan still wasn't about to let her go so naturally. The frustration was building inside him. She hadn't flinched. He decided to show no evidence of fear, and that annoyed him. He decided to. "You have to have something to hide." His voice came out as contemptuous. "People like you driving vehicles like these in areas like this. It does not make sense." "What then is the tale about narcotics fraud?" Emily kept her face calm. "What are you really up to?" Her breathing was steady. She had gone through this type of circumstance before, but today was not like any other day. Ryan was playing straight into her hands, while Ryan kept his tight implication she was up to no good. Emily's head was already recording every aspect of his behavior. The overt bigotry in his voice fit a pattern she had observed. An official similar to him, but Ryan had no idea who he was dealing with inside. She felt the weight of her mission, which she had been undercovering for months, now to look at claims of misbehavior and misuse of authority inside the Jackson Heights Police Department under observation. Following many allegations appeared regarding police using racial profiling along with excessive force and intimidation strategies. One name that had surfaced more than once: Ryan Myers was known to harass people of color, specifically utilizing his insignia as a shield to get away with actions that ought to have terminated his life. Emily had been meticulously gathering information from the shadows, observing from a career long ago. She had previously constructed strong case against multiple officials. Ryan was among the most targets. He had been on her radar for weeks, and this was more than simply a traffic stop. Was an opportunity to show him for his true nature. Ryan, blind to the tempest brewing against him, chose to advance even closer to the vehicle, leaning in his low but venomous voice. "You know, I could make this a lot of simpler for you. Just tell me what you are hiding, and perhaps we won't have to create a more significant event than what already exists." Emily said nothing, not wanting to give him the emotion he desired. She knew his game. He was trying to entice her, expecting she would lose her temper or make a mistake. So she let him continue excavating his own tomb. Every word he spoke was more evidence, another piece of the jigsaw that will finally bring Ryan down. Ryan, growing more annoyed by her composure, pulled out his radio. "Let's get some backup here," he shouted loud enough for Emily to hear. He was trying to humiliate her to create a commotion he reasoned would be created if additional police arrived. She would break beneath the strain, but Emily knew better. The more Ryan raised, the degree of damage would be. For him asking for backup, more individuals would be involved in this mess and more witnesses would be there, so increasing. Unquestionably, Ryan's actions will be remembered as he awaited backup. Emily's memories returned to the case she constructing. It was more than just Ryan. He was part of a more general issue, a culture of corruption let to fester among the department officials, such as Ryan worked with. Impunity, thinking they were above the law, covered by a code of silence among their peers. Emily had been silently but gathering information from individuals who had been victims that presented a picture of a very strongly. Ryan wasn't the only one she noticed. He was also a major actor in a faulty system. Her involvement in this probe aimed not only in eliminating one officer, but also in altering the operational procedures. Regarding making people in charge answerable, she had witnessed too many incidents whereby officials like Ryan got away with their assaults. She was resolved to stop it. This halt wasn't only about her. Was about every person who had been wrongfully treated, every life that had been disturbed by someone who believed untouchable. Ryan kept muttering to himself as he moved about the automobile waiting for backup with his identification. When Emily arrived, she could see the resentment building in him from the frustration she wasn't allowing him to handle. She wasn't there to make his work simple. She was there to ensure that for once someone like Ryan would encounter the. As the minutes passed, Emily stayed quiet, effects of his activities. Her demeanor was cool. She knew the rear would come shortly, and Ryan would have even more eyes on him. His ego would prevent him from backing down, and in his attempt to establish his power, he was merely delving more into. Emily could see the strain developing in his posture as his hands tightened and his jaw closed. Wasn't used to being questioned, and the fact that she wasn't displaying fear just motivated him more to assert. Emily felt the weight of the circumstances, yet she wasn't scared. She knew how to play the long game. Ryan, on the other hand, had been taught for times like this. Working on instinct, motivated by his passion to rule and humiliate, that was his. He was so intent on attempting to break her that he failed to see he was the one under observation being assessed in. The quiet between his rants, Emily considered the flawed system she was operating inside, and the individuals who had grievances about being harassed, bullied, or worse by authorities like Ryan. The system had failed them for far too long. Now was one step toward. Ryan knew his time was running short, but he did not know he was dragging that system down. Emily had all she required. She wasn't only gathering data from one stop, she had weeks of records. Witness accounts and records. Ryan's haughtiness about to catch up with him. When it did, there would be. Emily could not flee the repercussions since the distant sound of sirens was approaching. Stayed constant. She had performed her part exactly, and now it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. Ryan could still believe he was in charge down there, but shortly he would. Ryan stood tall, expecting support to arrive, and realized exactly how mistaken he was when the sound of siren approached. Confirm his power. This was the part where he felt most confident, where the circumstances would work in his advantage, since the appearance of additional police would increase demand on Emily. But something changed as the other cops showed their. Ryan observed it almost instantly. The normal friendliness was absent. They greeted him with the same carelessness. Instead of acknowledging as usual, they exchanged quick looks with more subdued facial expressions than he anticipated. Emily, still composed and peaceful, observed as the cop left. Ryan looked to them, expecting support, but their quiet was unsettling. He couldn't get rid of the impression that something was off from the circumstances slipping out of his hands. Control, it was not the typical process anymore, which unsettled him. Without Emily's voice shattered the silence. She had introduced herself to the cops. Her tone was consistent and distinct. Emily Davis remarked gently, pulling out a little badge from her blazer. I'm with Internal Affairs, hence name is Emily Davis. Words remained in the air for a while, and Ryan felt as though the ground had been ripped from under him. Within affairs, the two words he never wanted to hear. His heart missed a beat as he absorbed what Emily had just said. Emily wasn't some hapless woman he could threaten. She was one of the people Assigned to look at officials similar to him, she had been observing him the whole, while the other officials hadn't. Moved to back him, Ryan peered around. Their looks had changed. Actually, they were beginning to seem as though they were waiting for something Emily could have taken. The lead, he could feel the control he had been holding to slink through his fingers, wasn't going the way he had hoped. Emily turned to Ryan, had planned it, but it wasn't supposed to go this way at all. Her cool head never wavers over anything you have said and done during the stop. She said under inquiry for misbehavior. This incident will be. Ryan's breath stuck in his throat for a few seconds, and part of the report he thought about trying to ignore it in order to discredit her assertions, but Emily's eyes told him all he needed to know. She had everything his conceitful comments implied, not bluffing. His attempts to embarrass her had all been noted. There was no way out. He attempted to remain calm, but the panic was building inside of me, and I didn't do. Ryan fumbled, even though the words sounded hollow, even to him. Something was amiss. This was just a regular halt. He stopped knowing how fast he was going. Ludicrous, the excuse sounded in the face of the circumstances. Emily didn't flinch. You had no valid reason to stop me. Your actions were unprofessional. Your comments were racially charged, and you try to scare me without cause. All of this is recorded. Ryan's mouth went dry. His mind ran looking for something. Anything that might get him out of this. He had always been able to negotiate difficult circumstances. Before, he had always discovered a means to turn the circumstances to his advantage, but this time he knew it wasn't going to work there. Emily took a step forward, her voice steady but authoritative. You have been under some research for a while, Officer Myers. Although we have heard concerns about your behavior before, this will be the last. Her words really hit through. Ryan's pulse accelerated, and he felt the weight of what she was saying. Deep down, he knew that his behavior wasn't above criticism. He had pushed the envelope too often. Too many lines. He never considered it would come to this. Someone like Emily would be the one to expose him. The other cop held back, not saying anything. Ryan realized then. They understood. They had most likely been briefed before they came. They were coming to help him, not to be here for. See his collapse. The awareness strikes him like a kick to the belly. This incident, in line with various others, will be examined. Emily kept your. Today's events have proven our already suspected abuse of your authority, and now it's over. Ryan's mental reel. He found it incomprehensible what was happening here. Meant to be a regular stop, only another day on the job, but now his. Ryan said, his voice. His career was on a thread, and he had no one to blame but himself. You don't understand, Ryan replied. I was just doing my job. Emily's look stayed the same. I felt a little tremor. Your job is to serve and protect. She advised against harassing and intimidating. You now have to pay for Officer Myers's forgetting of the weight Ryan felt upon. Her words land on him like a weighty load. There was no way out, no more. This marked the end of the excuses, no more bending the rules to suit himself. One last time, he glanced at the other cops looking for some indication of support but found nothing. Here to see him fall, Emily stepped back with a posture as consistent as always, and they were not going to interfere. She said you would be officially notified of your suspension, and there will be a thorough inquiry of your behavior. I advise you to cooperate, Officer. Myers is your only choice. Ryan stood there silent while his mind flew. Emily had destroyed his universe in a matter of years as he struggled to understand the scope of what was happening. Minutes, and he had no means to halt it using his authority. Everything he had depended on for so long was collapsing right in front of Emily. Didn't wait for his reply. She had spoken everything that required said. Ryan entered the scene walking into the carnage of his own making, and the change in power was total. Station feeling the weight of his world collapsing around him, the typical buzz of conversation was subdued as he passed. His associates avoided eye contact, and the few that did so did so. Stiff nods as though they knew what was approaching but avoided to be connected with it, the unsaid separation in the room. Ryan felt it, trying to keep his cool, but it was getting more difficult by the minute. His mind ran with the knowledge that his actions had at last caught up with him, the anxiety of losing. Everything was starting to seem all too real. He had always taken great satisfaction in his power to regulate circumstances, but today had taught him how rapidly that power may fade. Emily's His confidence had been calmly undermined, leaving him vulnerable. The reality of an internal affairs probe hovering above did not let him concentrate. He knew the complaints were out there, but this time he had always been able to evade responsibility. Was no escape. Emily's task was far from finished after her. Meet Ryan. She lost no time delving further into the case against him. She had been gathering proof for weeks, but this most recent occurrence fed the fire. Ryan wasn't only a separate issue as she sieved over allegations and reports revealing a persistent pattern of racial assault, profiling, abuse of power and authority. It was not only Ryan's. Several more cops were linked either by direct behavior or by looking the other way from what was occurring. Emily's research was expanding around them, and it was obvious that she recognized that corruption went deep and that the systematic problems within would go beyond simply eliminating one officer. It was time for a reckoning she began attending. The department had been let to flourish for too long. Police who had become weary of the poisonous surroundings, those who had silently questioned Ryan's strategies, hadn't felt confident enough to share insightful comments, verifying what Emily already suspected. Ryan wasn't acting alone. Rather, a network of police had gone unbridled, using their authority to threaten. Years of Emily's pushing forward the department grew more split. There were tired of the shadow and ready to see the force cleared and justice served. Over the batch, Ryan and others like him had cast. Yet, there were also some who were cautious of her, usually cops who stayed faithful to Ryan and objected to Emily's presence. Some thought internal affairs overreached, and others worried that Emily's research may expose their own dubious behavior. Thus, the conflict in the station developed as everyone watched to see what Emily's internal conflict would lead to. Held a meeting with her staff to go over the more general problems. It was not only about Ryan anymore. The department had to address Emily, as it had let an abusive culture go unchecked. Presented her research tying the questions between Ryan and the cops who had either supported or disregarded his behavior. The conference was heated as Emily and her group examined the mounting proof of systematic corruption it was causing. Ryan's lawsuit was only the beginning, so Emily was resolved to reveal every depth of transgression right back at. Ryan got the official notice of his inquiry, his heart hammered. He was reading the paperwork. He had been summoned in to undergo a formal inquiry on his behavior, and the weight of it all landed on him like a sledgehammer. He had usually managed to avoid consequences, but this time there was no. Ryan's testimony was too strong, and the walls were closing in as he arriving in the investigation chamber. He was met with a panel of police and internal affairs. Ryan struggled to hang on to the representatives. Angelo was there, observing silently. Conceit that had once served as his armor but was erasing. He tried to justify himself, saying he was merely performing his job and that his actions followed accepted procedure. Yet every justification he made was greeted with cold, hard proof to the reverse. Witnesses had come out with Emily's thorough record of his abuses formed a picture that left recorded complaints seeming different. There is little room for uncertainty as the investigation continued, with Ryan becoming more frantic with every piece of evidence stacked against him. He sought to assign the guilt, to imply that he had been exaggerating or that the grievances were based on misinterpreted, but everyone in the room recognized Ryan was guilty of far more than Emily watched as Ryan's bravado fell apart. Misunderstanding, once unquestionable, was now replaced by a desperation to hang to what little remained of his career. But the facts were indisputable. His time as an officer was running out, and he had no way to stop it. Ryan was instructed to leave the room after a long silence, and he left the room while the panel debated. He walked outside. As he waited, the truth of his circumstances sunk. The door closing behind him with a finality left him hollow. Though he had always seen himself as untouchable, today he was dealing with the results of his deeds. He had never really believed would happen. Emily stayed inside talking about the upcoming. With her team, they had been able to bring Ryan to justice. Yet, more work remained to be done. Angelo was ready to take on Ryan's fall. Research on the corruption in the department was only starting. Just one piece of the jigsaw. Emily understood they had to keep on if they were to tidy the department. Ryan had to reveal every police who had misused their authority and help the community to regain faith. At last returned into the chamber, Swift's decision on the panel was swift. He was suspended awaiting more inquiry. Given a high probability of termination, the official investigation had made abundantly evident that his police career was. Knowing he had lost everything Ryan departed the station that day. Emily knew there were still a lot of battles, but this was a minor triumph in a far bigger fight. Though many difficulties lie ahead, she was more resolved than ever the corruption that has grown inside. The department wasn't going to vanish overnight. Rather, with every stride forward, she was one step closer to rebuilding. Justice and responsibility to force the investigation against Ryan advanced at a speed he wasn't ready for. Emily's evidence was strong. She had painstakingly compiled records of everything she had. Their interaction with the pattern of citizen and officer complaints against him even reflects. Every piece of evidence from people who had been mistreated under his supervision was like another nail in the tool set. There was no space for denial or room for excuses in his professional coffin. Ryan had to face the indisputable truth of his deeds exposed for everyone to see while Emily talked. The room stayed. Silence, but from the sound of her voice delineating the methodical mistreatment Ryan had committed, she recounted how his actions were not only individual events, but also a result of a departmental issue she had done homework on. Every detail supported strong evidence the other cops engaged in covering up Ryan or turning a blind eye was also mentioned. Now, Ryan himself took front stage. Ryan sat there, the weight of the evidence crushing him, the conceit he had previously shown replaced by. He stared blankly, then realized just how deep he had excavated his own tomb from. His badge, once a sign of his power, now a reminder of how he had misused the authority that came with it as the panel passed. There was no surprise left in him, as his badge was taken away, the exact thing that had gave him a sense of supremacy for so many years till the investigation came to an end. Ryan's destiny was set. He was not merely suspended indefinitely, but rather confronting. From his behavior and misuse of authority his entire life, possible legal charges from it were collapsing in front of him. The career he had spent years developing, the identity he had enveloped his role as a police officer, and was now only ashes. Ryan had always felt he was above the law, as the system had repeatedly shown him to be. Emily had revealed him, though, and now there was no turning back. As Ryan left the inquiry with his world broken, Emily stayed calm, thinking back on the long trip that had brought her here. Ryan was only one officer, one cog in a vast. Her mission wasn't complete. Greater machines of corruption and exploitation, her knowledge understood. Cleansing the department would require more than simply Ryan's exposure. Additional like-minded police had ran with impunity for far too long, and Emily had just touched the surface. Emily's bosses approved. The importance of what she had done had brought down a seasoned cop who had appeared to be untouchable for years. They praised her dedication and diligence, acknowledging that although her efforts were a vital first step in rebuilding departmental faith, they also advised her on the system still lacked resilience, hence change would not be possible. Future obstacles lied ahead. There were readily those in the department who would object to her initiatives, others who were uneasy with the. Emily realized that the degree of responsibility she was expecting was a fight not easily won overnight. The weight of what was ahead went beyond Ryan to include destroying a society that had let officials like him flourish. She recognized that the road ahead would be challenging with pushback. She was ready, though, having seen the devastation unbridled power could cause, and resolved to carry on her struggle for justice. As Emily exited the investigation, her mind drifted to the future. Her next project involved another case, another challenge. The work of making people in authority answerable was never really completed, but Emily sensed resolve, knowing that every step each officer kept on record was a triumph, not only for her, but for the people who had been victimized, for the society that had lost faith in the very institution supposed to defend them. Ryan's collapse served as a reminder of the results of unbridled power, but also a call to action. Emily's Work underlined the need of responsibility inside the police, of making sure the badge served as no shield for transgression but a sign of integrity. She understood that if she could remove one dishonest official, many more could be taken down. Emily was ready to keep on even if the battle seemed far from finished. Emily was ready for her next assignment. Her job wasn't simple, but it served a purpose that drove her. She had seen personally the harm that may result from unbridled authority, and the making people in charge answerable for their deeds was a hard path, but one she was on. Those who misuse willing to walk the story ended with a clear reminder: power come with responsibility. We'll meet Justice Emily's objective not only in toppling Ryan but also was about bringing about long-lasting change to make sure anyone bearing the emblem knew what it really represented. Wasn't completed, but she understood every stride forward was a triumph for justice. Tell us in the comments what you would have done in Emily's circumstances. Remember to subscribe for more tales. People question the establishment and highlight the struggle for fairness and responsibility. Disclaimer: this channel is opposed to all forms of discrimination, bigotry, intolerance, and human rights violations. The narratives presented here are original works that were crafted to foster constructive dialogue, comprehension, and introspection. The production of all content is guided by a dedication to the preservation of human dignity and the respect for diversity.